Hello and welcome to this month's Wild World of Wounds. This month I'm just going to talk about some of the key points that came out of a dermatology conference that I just recently got back from. And they touched on a lot of very interesting points, but the one I wanted to talk about was the use of high-dose steroids. So they spent quite a good amount of time talking about the potential downside of high-dose steroids and how to use them properly. So we've heard of atrophy of the skin that can happen with high-dose steroids, and that's where the skin will actually have this divot or this depression that occurs due to the use of the high-dose steroid for a prolonged period of time. And then there's stria, those lines look like stretch marks that can occur. Of course, that's not so nice when you have skin atrophy and stria on your face or some other cosmetic area. They made the point, which I thought was interesting, that the atrophy that occurs tends to improve and reverse over time, but the stria do not, and those tend to be permanent. They also made the point that different areas of the body will have vastly different amounts of systemic absorption. They talked about in the groin area, for example, many times the absorption than say on your arm. And so depending on where you put it, you can start getting near systemic levels of topical steroids, although it's a totally different question to actually show that there's cases where you've suppressed the hypothalamic pituitary axis by using topical steroids. But in any event, it's just good to know that depending on where you're putting it, how you're occluding it, topical steroids can have a much higher absorption in some areas of the body versus others. Another interesting point they brought up was the use of lotrozone, and you've probably run into this before, that many dermatologists don't like lotrozone. And they made some good reasons why they don't like lotrozone. For one thing, I think that they were under the impression that a lot of people don't realize that lotrozone is a high-potency steroid. So you start using this high-potency steroid in places where you might also want an antifungal, like in the groin area or the axilla, and now that's, those are areas already with thin skin, so they did not like that. And they worry about, the skin atrophy and the stria that it can produce, the higher levels of systemic absorption. And one of the dermatologists mentioned how there are many lawsuits that I guess he was aware of from the use of lotrozone in these areas and having these cosmetic and potential side effects related to it. So he also mentioned that lotrozone was actually developed, and I didn't know this, or approved for, I should say, tinea pedis with inflammation. But he also made the point that it was later shown that the lotrozone slowed down the resolution of the tinea pedis. It actually did cause it to resolve more slowly when the antifungal was mixed with the high-potency steroid. So in his opinion, it's a medicine that shouldn't exist. Of course, we find that there are potential clinical uses for a steroid with an antifungal in some circumstances. So at least I feel like there are potential reasonable uses of this medication, but we have to be aware again that this is a high potency steroid we're using, not a lower potency steroid, so you wouldn't want to use it differently than you would any other high potency steroid. I think if you keep that in mind, you can keep yourself out of trouble. Another interesting point was that they talked about was how long should you use high-potency steroids for. And they were talking about using high-potency steroids in different conditions, eczema and psoriasis, and different conditions that you use high-potency steroids for. So the question was, how long can you use it for continuously? And in general, it sounds like 2 weeks is the recommendation. You can use high-potency steroids for 2 weeks, Again, we're not talking about putting it in areas of very thin skin or on your face, but in general body areas that are generally considered safe for high potency steroids. The recommendation is about 2 weeks, and depending on what you're using, maybe up to 4 weeks. As I said, 2 weeks sounds like the general recommendation, but they also said they seem to say it was reasonable, depending on the circumstances, to go out to 4 weeks. Beyond that, they then would recommend tailoring back, and if you do have an ongoing chronic condition like eczema that keeps coming out in a certain area, they were, at least one of the dermatologists made the point that she was a big fan of maintenance therapy. And what she meant by maintenance therapy was, now that it's gone, you still apply the treatment in the area where it had historically recurred, even though there's no symptoms in that area right now. And the way that she did that is she would have her patients use, for example, a high-potency steroid just on the weekends. So you get a 5-day break, and then you can put it on, maybe once or twice a day over the weekend, and then you're done again for 5 days. And she said that, with just treating it on the weekends and not treating it during the week, then you really can use that for a very prolonged period of time, with a much greater safety, and not worry as much about causing a lot of those cosmetic side effects. Giving them that long 5-day break if you're only using it once a day on the weekends and not using it during the week. And then I asked her, well, at what point would you stop using it? I mean, can you do that forever? And she said, well, if it's been a year and they've had no symptoms, there's no point. It would probably make sense to give them a period of where they stop using the steroid, so we can just see, is it gone? Is it going to recur? But it sounded like from her answer that you can definitely use it for a prolonged period of time in that manner. But we do have to be careful using it continuously longer than 2 and maybe up to 4 weeks. All right, I hope you enjoyed this month's Wild World of Wounds. I'll see you next month. Bye for now.